Greetings from the edge of reality. Welcome to Paranormal M, where we dive deep into the mysteries that defy explanation. Subscribe now, activate notifications, and drop a like or a comment, and stay in the loop with our latest mind-bending discoveries. Let the adventure begin. So some strange things are happening, and I don't know what to do or who to tell. So a bit of background information. I live in New Zealand. In my early 20s, I live alone for the most part. I also live in a brand new house, if that means anything. So basically, for just about as long as I can remember, but having strange experiences that I can't quite explain. Mostly sudden intense feelings, usually of terror and panic. On the occasion I've seen things to accompany the feelings. Never anything particularly concise, but always a darker than black shape. A few years ago, while stopping to relive myself while driving through an extremely remote part of the country at night, I was hit by the feeling, only this time it was different. I heard a voice scream out, "Go!" At the time, I was unsure if it was inside my head or from somebody else, but regardless of that, I got back into my car as quick as I could and floored it, much to the distaste of my friend who was riding shotgun. As I drove off, I looked into the rearview mirror, saw what looked like figures standing in the road. I asked my friend if he had seen them. He said he hadn't been paying attention. I was beginning to think it must have been a figment of my imagination until my friend asked why I had yelled at him to go. So at least some of it must have been real. I definitely wasn't the one who had called it out. Anyways, for a while after that, I didn't see anything else, although I still got the feeling semi-regularly. Fast forward to this past year, and I've moved to the other end of the country and live by myself. And until this past week, I hadn't seen anything since I'd moved, and the sudden feeling seemed to be less frequent. Last weekend, however, I was lying in bed when suddenly I got hit with the feeling of terror. I looked up and saw something dart out of my room and into the living room. I immediately got up and checked one by one that all the doors and windows were locked, and they were. When I got to the last window, however, there was absolute darkness, no light coming from the street, or from other houses around me like there should have been. And then for barely a split second, there was what I can only describe as glowing red eyes staring back at me. It then all turned to normal, and the usual lights were back. Obviously fairly shaken, I returned to my bed and was awake all night, but I didn't see anything else. Just about every night since then, I've seen a dark figure, or sometimes a few of them moving throughout the house. Although I haven't seen the red eyes again. For the most part, I haven't had any kind of interaction with them, nor they with me, other than seeing them move around. They seem to be visible no longer than 30 seconds. The feelings dissipate fairly quickly after that. They seem to be getting more defined as the week has progressed. No discernible features, but definitely human silhouettes. So tonight, I saw one in the corner of the room, just standing, watching me. This time for much longer than 30 seconds. But there was no fear or other feelings that accompanied this one. After probably an hour of it apparently coming and going, I was hit with the worst bout of sensations I've had in a year. Tears streaming down my face, and a gut-wrenching feeling of terror. For whatever reason, I had a feeling that I had to check the sliding door that leads outside from my room. And what I saw is still making my skin crawl. There was at least 5 figures with red eyes staring back at me. I still don't quite know what to make of it. They didn't move or try to harm me, but the feelings that I had were absolutely terrifying and the worst I've ever experienced. Have been coming in waves since I saw them. Still haven't mustered the courage to look again. Something strange has happened to me while living in my Nana's home. I've always been able to see spirits. As a kid, I would hear things in my childhood home walking around calling for me while everyone else was asleep. My mother at one point saw a dark figure with red eyes, and in response called some women from the church to cleanse the house. Now that was just a few instances at my childhood home, but I've seen at my Nana's was way worse. When I was about 12, my parents split, and eventually we went to stay with my Nana for a while. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom with the door open, and I glanced over and I saw a man's face right beside me staring at me. This obviously freaked me out since I was young, but my Nana had always just said it was my papa that died when I was 2. The strangest thing was a few months ago. I was sitting in my living room with my cousin Jay waiting for his sister C to come inside from the back porch to play some card games. She was out there for a while, so when I finally saw her walk past, I said something to Jay along the lines of, "Oh, there she is, finally." I'd figured she'd gone to her room and put her stuff away, but then the back door opened and she walked right in. I was completely freaked out. I had seen some strange things, but nothing like this before. I figured I was just seeing the house spirit, till a few nights ago the same thing happened with the same cousin. The room I'm staying in at my Nana's doesn't have a door on it, so I pinned up a throw blanket for some privacy. The blanket only covers half of the door, so I can see people's legs as they walk by. The other night at around 1:40, I was still up on my phone, I was facing the wall, rolled over, and as I did, I saw C walking past quickly. It scared me a little, but since the room's right next, made sense. She probably had to use the bathroom after all. Not even 10 minutes later, I hear her door open and she walks out to use the bathroom. I called her and asked her if she had just walked out, and she very sleepily said no. That's when I knew I hadn't seen her then either. I should also mention that C has seen something dark in this house standing over people while they sleep. One of the times in the room I'm in, she's also seen a white spirit in the home too. My Nana likes to think all these encounters are my papa, but I don't think so. I thought it was a home invasion. So since we'd moved into this house, there'd been noises and weird occurrences, but they could be explained away, like loud knocking on her bedroom window while sleeping, or the sound of somebody working in the workhouse late at night, chairs being moved in the dining room, etc. I never am one to jump on, "It's paranormal," because I know life is weird, and there are great explanations for most weird things that happen. However, since the event where we heard the loud crash, nothing has happened. It's been quite a few days, which is very strange. We also have been trying to stay calm and have a white noise on while we're sleeping, so we don't read too much into the house noises. Thankfully, there have been no house noises. Until last night. I was dead asleep from Valentine's Day dinner. Thank you, wine. Cheers. But it was only 9 p.m., so my husband was awake. He woke me up because he kept hearing things. Mind you, this man was raised Jehovah's Witness and extremely skeptical. He actually didn't believe anything like this could be possible until he met me. So I woke up but said something like, "Whatever, I'm going back to sleep." Then I heard a chair being moved in the kitchen. I checked the camera, nothing. Then I hear what sounds like furniture being moved into our guest room, things falling in the living room. We get our gun, we check it out. Nothing. We go to sleep. And later in the night we hear somebody loudly knocking on our window. This had happened before, but no one was seen on our outdoor cameras. I wake up the next day, this morning. I get my daughter and I get ready for the day. I walk towards our bedroom to get a phone charger and see this on the floor. It was very obviously, purposely placed there. I messaged my husband and I asked if he placed it there, and he didn't. The wall this is sitting against is kind of connected to my in-bedroom office, which was not used at all yesterday. It was left alone all day and night. What makes this significant is that the pictures of my dad holding me as a newborn. My dad died when I was around 4 months old. My adoptive dad heavily verbally abused me until I escaped at the age of 13. He also really hated the fact that I had a different dad and wouldn't let me refer to him as my dad. Bastard. This feels like a taunt, though I guess it could be my dad's way of trying to comfort me. Sigh. Sigh indeed. I think I had a ghost in my dorm. My freshman year of college, I lived in a dorm with 3 others, and it was set up like an apartment. We each had our own room, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, and a small living area. I've always believed in ghosts, but I'd never experienced anything. Roommate C was pretty neutral. Roommate B was a hard believer, believed she was one to attract spirits with how often it became a theme in her life. And D was fairly skeptical, but the idea terrified her. The first incident to happen was when I was in the shower and had a YouTube playlist on. The song suddenly started skipping forward every few seconds, went on for like a minute and then stopped. This happened multiple times, even sometimes the playlist going back 4 or 5 songs. One day I got fed up, jumped out, watched as my phone screen flipped between songs, and it appeared almost as if somebody was scrolling the playlist back and forth and picking songs. The second I picked up my phone, it stopped. It typically only happened while I was in the shower, but once happened while I was cooking home alone. The next thing was a one-time thing, and it started the whole "our dorm is haunted" joke. One day my TV just went static out of nowhere for about 5 minutes. I could not figure out why. Now, I'm not the best with technology, but I didn't have a cable, only a Fire Stick, and I checked that everything was plugged in. Thought it was just weird till roommate C had told me this happened often with her TV. She just usually didn't think anything of it. I've had the same TV for the last 3 years, and this had never happened, nor happened again, by the way. At this point, B and I were all for the ghost theory, and even started researching the campus ghost, Isabella, to see where she last resided. We learned she was last placed at dorms on the opposite side of the campus. Through what we learned, the ghost was most likely not the well-known Isabella. Started to scare our other 2 roommates when the AC started to be put in the 30s while we were gone. The dorm thermostat is older than, well, it was controlled by a tiny lever. One that took effort to move, by the way. Roommate D claimed that she 100% saw it, and it moved on its own. At one point, when it was just A and me in the dorm, I heard her go from her room to the bathroom. The shower turned on and another loud door shut. While the 3 doors shuts were strange in my head, I thought it's whatever. Later, talking to her, she said the door was slammed shut when she got out of the shower. I told her what I heard, and she told me that she didn't close her bedroom door and she thought it was weird when she heard the door, but assumed it was mine till she saw hers closed. I pointed out her dorm was on a slant. Maybe it shut itself, but she pointed out the door went the opposite way due to the slant. So, unless our dorm shifted slants and shifted back, it wouldn't be possible without force. The last thing is less physical, and the most freaky. One day, A asked me if I ever got the overwhelming feeling to not leave my room, or if I'd ever seen something in the corner of my eye in the living room. I was scared because the exact things and feelings she explained were identical to mine. I told her I always brushed them off because I'm very anxious, and assumed I was just paranoid. When C came around, she tried to see if she felt the same, giving her less than what she gave me, to see if C matched us, and she did. Warned me to never leave my room if I feel that again, and though I partially thought she was just trying to scare me, it was strange how we all experienced these feelings. I now live in the same dorms, but a different building. I've never experienced those things again. Even though it was kind of a joke at first, and we even joked it was my grandma that had passed early in the semester, little bad feelings just made the place much scarier by the end. At one point, we thought it was that thing that calls names and other voices. I had experienced that, but we ended up concluding it was just sleep-deprived at that time. Considering A had the most history with the paranormal, she thought it was following her. At least at first. But most things seemed to affect me, and she thought it may have been me. But since I left that dorm, I haven't had any other experiences like that. But I love to joke about the ghost on campus that no one knows, cause, well, Isabella gets all the credit. Ask Reddit. I used to drive a truck over the road. One evening I'm driving south through Missouri. Can't remember exactly the route I was taking, but it was a state highway a little north of I-44. It was a little after sunset. There was snow all over the countryside, and since it was a small highway, there were no lights. However, the moon was full, and because of the snow, it was pretty bright outside. I'm on the phone with my mom, and we're discussing something or another. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, this shadowy figure appears on the oncoming lane. It was pretty large, but it was very low to the ground. The best I could describe it is it was roughly shaped like an alligator with a much shorter tail. When I first caught a glimpse of it, I thought it might be an old retired tire, or some other debris maybe on the road. But when I was about 100 feet away, the object turned to my direction and my headlights hit its eyes. The moment I saw the eyes, the thing darts into my lane and then off the road. I missed it by about 15 feet. I immediately look in my mirrors to see if I can get another glimpse of it, but I couldn't see anything. The movement of the creature was so strange it almost floated, but it moved very quickly. Even when it was right in my headlights, I couldn't make out anything other than it being a dark creature unlike anything I've ever seen. I was in the middle of a sentence when all this happened, and I let out a loud, "What the fuck?" That's when my mom asked what happened. I explained what I'd seen. She asks how long I've been driving, and if I was tired. I told her I had only been driving for about 7 hours, and that I had taken a run with my dog about an hour earlier, roughly. I brushed it off, and we kept talking for a little while, but it had really creeped me out. Still have no idea what it was that I saw. Still creeps me out sometimes. Simultaneous experience. Around 2000, I was living in Hollister, California with my dad, his dog, and mostly outdoor cats in a somewhat rural area in the neighborhood where each residence was on a 5-acre lot. That was after moving back from living in Knoxville, Tennessee with my mom, stepdad, and half-sister. I don't recall having prior paranormal experiences, and haven't had any remarkable experiences since. A very close friend of my mom and dad's during college, whom we still remain close to and talk often with, Bob. Bob was very much into researching paranormal phenomena from people's experiences, and also historical references. He was fascinated, especially by my great-great-grandmother, Mary Hayes Chynoweth. and her documented abilities, especially in a book by Louisa Johnson Clay, 1914, titled The Spirit Dominant, A Life of Mary Hayes Chenoweth. During my 2-year period living with my dad again, Bob used to visit us pretty often. That was in Los Angeles, where he had moved to after college to work on the Merv Griffin show as a producer. Would seek out some interesting guests involving the supernatural in various capacities from time to time. Bob would describe amazing events and uncanny moments of how things intertwined amongst these guests and his personal life. I wish I could recall these spectacular stories, but that's for another time. Anyways, Bob would drive up from LA every 2 to 4 weeks and stay with my dad and I for a few days. And this went on until my dad met and married my stepmom. That was 2001. She ultimately moved into the house later that year. She had 2 adult children, and her son, Kyle, was 19, the same age as me at the time. He would stay at the house often for days at a time, and we got along pretty well. There were 3 bedrooms, but they were all occupied, my dad's, mine, and my other half-sister from my dad's previous marriage. But she was only there on occasion and was 12 years younger than me. I was working 2 part-time jobs and preparing to move back to my mom's to, resume university in late 2003 in Ithaca, New York. Kyle and I would each have our significant others and friends over on occasions as our parents would travel frequently. We were of the age where we'd party into the wee hours of the morning on occasion. Kyle was staying overnight several times a week, and we had grown relatively close over the couple of years. I don't recall specifically what day or month for that matter when my experience occurred, but it was nighttime, around midnight. And it was just Kyle and I in the house as our parents were out of town again. We hadn't had anybody else over that day or night and just had a lazy day at home. We were both heading to bed. Kyle slept on a camping mat and used a sleeping bag to sleep on the sort of carpeted floor in the dining room on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms. It was a typical quiet night in the sparsely populated neighborhood. Aside from the wondrous sounds of nighttime nature, mostly insects. I do recall this was not the rainy season because then the frogs' nighttime chorus would have muffled all the other sounds during dusk to dawn. The neighborhood and part of the town where we live is also very obscured from light pollution. And that's pretty fortunate, and thus quite dark. I closed my bedroom door as I had always done for as long as I can remember. I read a little bit in a book. I was sort of just reading. I was getting tired. Switched off the light on my nightstand beside my bed and proceeded to go to sleep on my back with my hands partially overlapping on my chest. Not too much time had passed. Perhaps maybe 20 minutes or so while attempting to drift off to sleep. For whatever reason, I suddenly heard very loud, deep breaths. I still had my eyes closed and wasn't asleep, and I recall a childhood fear I had heard at one point regarding hearing breathing while in bed at night, thinking it's your own and subsequently holding your breath to discover that the breathing sounds are still audible. This is exactly what occurred at this moment when I heard these slow, deep, rhythmic breaths. They sounded to me what I would imagine a man's heavy breathing to sound like. I remember thinking I must be dreaming or imagining this sound, being fearful of opening my eyes and seeing something dreadful. So I instead decided to hold my breath, hoping that it was my own breathing sounding strange for some reason. Unfortunately, the heavy breathing continued while I held my breath. I was frighteningly shocked at what I was experiencing. Perhaps only 10 to 20 seconds had elapsed, but it scared me enough to make me bravely open my eyes and peek about the darkness for unknown shapes. Fortunately, there was nothing there, so I switched my bedside lamp on and looked around my room under the bed and the closet. I was tenuously relieved. So I again attempted to go back to sleep, dismissed the incident as my mind playing tricks on me. As I'm laying there again in the same position as before on my back with hands resting on each other on my chest, I begin drifting off to sleep again. But not much longer again, something much more frightening happens. I feel this immense pressure on my chest and fingers begin forcefully curled toward my palm in the shape of a fist. I'm having difficulty breathing due to this weight on top of me. This didn't happen for too long, but after the frightful breathing occurrence and then this, I jumped out of bed and ran out of my room and decided to go to the living room and watch TV on the couch with the lights on. Earlier that night, I'd seen Kyle go to his bed in the dining room. All of the lights were off in the house when I made my way to bed not too long ago, perhaps 30 minutes earlier. As I approach the living room, which is also on the same end of the house as the dining room, I'm surprised to see Kyle on the couch with the TV on. I say hey, and he says hey. I said I was having trouble sleeping. He said the same thing. So I take a seat in the recliner chair and we're watching something on TV, which I don't really recall what, but I do know it wasn't something scary. A few minutes into us being there, we were both eerily quiet. I was still in shock as to what I'd just experienced, and I mentioned something vague about just a really weird experience. He agrees, literally begins to tell me the exact same thing that just happened to me only minutes before. I said, Kyle, are you fucking with me? Because this isn't funny. He looks at me confused, and we're both obviously agitated and frightened, and I explained, well, what he had just described happened exactly the same to me. We both sat silently in disbelief and deduced that this seemed to happen simultaneously to each of us, due to the timing of us both being in the living room. He said he wasn't out there much sooner than I was. Still shaken by what had just occurred, we decided to watch something funny. Though I don't recall if we found something on TV or chose a movie, but we just wanted to put this scary situation behind us. Hope it would never happen again. As the hours passed, Kyle had moved to the carpeted floor in the front of the coffee table. I decided to move to the couch as we were both getting tired. Perhaps an hour, maybe two later, we both awakened violently, breathlessly, and forcefully and simultaneously from our positions of lying down to sitting up, gasping for breath and shaking. We were shaking our bodies as if to shake off the now familiar feeling of being compressed by a massive weight on our chests. The awakening of us was loudly audible, and we were both fearfully looking around, dazed and confused. And again, we both experienced the same weight and forceful, involuntary clenching of our hands into fists. Ultimately, we proceed to calm down, and we're just like, what the fuck's going on? We make small chit-chat, and Kyle tells me about one of his friends, Rocco. He'd been at our house numerous times, and we had parties. Rocco was a very big dude, tall, linebacker body type, and doesn't scare easily, according to Kyle, which is totally believable considering his size. He says that one night it was just him and Rocco hanging out at our house. They were outside at nighttime, just chilling and walking around the house and the yard a little bit, just messing around. Kyle went inside to use the bathroom and was gone for several minutes. Rocco thought he heard breathing very close to him, thought it was Kyle messing with him, so he turned around quickly and realized nothing was around him. This happened a few times to Rocco while Kyle was inside. So Rocco decided to go inside after that and didn't want to go back outside. Anyways, this was my one and only experience. It was helpful for my remaining sanity to have experienced it with another person who was able to validate it without any influence of details. If anything, Kyle could have thought I was messing with him, but he never said that. I could tell by my demeanor that I wasn't messing with him and I wasn't fabricating nor embellishing my occurrence, especially after the incident together in the same room at the exact same moment. I mentioned Bob in the beginning to provide context to my life at the time, and also to insinuate that I wasn't, closed-minded to the possibilities of the unknown. I don't want to ever have an experience like that again, and I remind myself of it from time to time so I don't forget. I've also told it verbally in relevant encounters of my life and will continue to do so whenever appropriate, and hopefully will encourage others to not easily dismiss their own experiences as simply their imaginations or dreams, or whatever excuse they deem necessary to pander to the skeptics. Ask Reddit. I work night shift at a local hospital. My coworkers and I were all sharing our paranormal experiences with each other the other night. Most involve things that can be explained away. Malfunctioning equipment, flickering lights, the kind of stuff you call maintenance for and forget about. But a few were pretty weird, so here goes. First was a couple of years ago. We were taking care of an older fellow who was totally with it. Knew who he was, where he was, why he was there, everything. Nothing out of the ordinary, no confusion, nothing. During the day, his family visited and left when visiting hours ended so we could get some rest. Out of nowhere, at about 2 or 3 in the morning, we heard him talking with someone. We went in to check on him and make sure he didn't need any help. He was looking at the empty chair next to his bed and talking with his wife, who he could see, but we could not. Thought it was a little bit odd, but hey, he's old, so maybe he's got some baseline undiagnosed dementia or something. Maybe he was just sundowning a bit. Not uncommon on our floor, so we wrote it off as some late-night confusion. Stops talking with her, go back to sleep, and about 15 minutes later, though, we get a call from his adult son. Asks us to tell his father that his wife, the patient's, not the son's, that his wife had passed away about 20 minutes ago. Second was a little more recent. It's a little after midnight and visiting hours are over. It's just patients and staff now. Everyone else has gone home. We head into a patient's room to knock out some vitals and some medications. The patient tells us, "Someone needs to get that kid out of here." We double-checked the room just to be sure nobody stayed behind, but sure enough, there's no visitors there, kids or otherwise. We assure her there's no kids in the room with her, and again, write it off as some late-night confusion or hallucinations. Once more, not that uncommon. Where it gets weird, though, is when one of our co-workers, who is on the totally opposite side of the unit, comes over and talks with us. Tells us how, when he went in for midnight vitals, one of his patients asked him, "Hey, did you see that little kid who's been running by?" Made us want to call the pediatric floor to ask if they'd lost anybody. But at the same time, we didn't really want to know. Irish skeptic visits USA. Now I believe in ghosts. I'm a 37-year-old male from Ireland. My wife is 35 from Texas. I have an interest in horror movies and scary stories. But I've always been a skeptic in reality. My wife had told me about experiencing paranormal encounters in her family home, which I shrugged off as I've slept in buildings and castles 1,000 years old and experienced nothing. So how could she experience such things in a 50-year-old home in America? Excuse my arrogant Europeanisms, but I was wrong. I assumed she was just overly superstitious, as she's kind of Hispanic, which, like the Irish, have a rich cultural history of everything considered paranormal. Ghosts, witches, demons, etc. On the night in question, I'm in San Antonio, Texas, visiting my wife's family. I'm awake lying on her bed, staring through a doorway that leads to the living room area that belongs to my wife. Her bedroom is like a mini apartment. A bug just flew into my mouth. Protein. It's dark, and around 4 a.m. when I see a jet black cloud float along the floor in the living room. When I say black, I mean absolutely black, almost like a bad Photoshop in a photograph. So here I am looking at this cloud as it suddenly starts to stretch from its right side into a triangle shape. That was until it couldn't stretch anymore and snapped back into itself and evaporates, leaving a head staring at me from the floor. The head is also jet black and is only visible from the neck up onto the floor. I couldn't see its face, but I'll always remember seeing the window light shining through its long curly hair. I'm in disbelief. Wake my wife as I'm still making eye contact with this head on the floor. I must have seen it for 15 seconds straight. That was before my wife looks up and I turn on the flashlight on my phone on the head's direction and it just disappeared. After the event, my wife told me that she used to sleep with a blanket wall just sort of stacked on the bed covering the view of the doorway that I was looking through. She said she used to do it because she was afraid that she'd see something. She's experienced noises, heard the voices of people talking, yet never seen anything. But when we told her family, her mother and aunties said that they've seen super fast glimpses of a black head looking around the doorway of the kitchen and the dining room. I wasn't aware of this beforehand, so my description of the black head really dropped some jaws at the dinner table. Amazingly, I wasn't frightened. I was just absolutely shocked and almost thrilled that I now fully believe in ghosts. And not only ghosts, but the afterlife. I still don't believe in organized religion, but at least now I believe in something. I can't find information online regarding black shape-shifting cloud entities. Really? The cloud itself was blacker than black, with sharp rotating edges, almost like it contained a cyclone or a black hole, but it was so dark that you couldn't see any definition inside of it. A demon looked down on me while I was trying to sleep. 1 week ago, I was invited to a party by a friend of mine. We got some food, got to her apartment that, to be honest, it doesn't have a weird feeling to it. We had fun, laughed, discussed some things, time went by like nothing, and then we went to sleep. First of all, I'm the only religious person of the group. I'm wearing a necklace with a cross at all times. And what happened next was my truly first, paranormal encounter in 20 years. By that time, it was almost morning. I couldn't sleep, maybe because I was sleeping on the floor. I took my necklace and I slept with it in my hand because it helps me with my OCD and all that. The friend that slept in bed next to me eventually woke up. I crawled up into bed while she was on the balcony with the rest of the group, and I was trying to fall back asleep. I was with my face to the wall with the pillow on top of my head. That's when I heard footsteps coming out of the bathroom, walking slowly toward me. Initially, I thought it was one of my friends, as I said I was sleepy. But then the footsteps ended right behind me and stood there for a second. Went back in the bathroom just as slow as it came. I didn't think much of it until afternoon when the friend that lives in that apartment told us that she's heard somebody walking around in the house even when she's home alone. I told her it happened to me. Now she wants to call a priest to cleanse the house. Spirit attached to a loft bed I got on Facebook Marketplace. Facebook Marketplace warning. This story happened at least 6 years ago. It's when I was 10 years old. I begged for a loft bed so I would have more space for my things, and eventually my grandma gave in and bought one for me. One night I woke up drenched in sweat with all my blankets removed from my body. As I laid in my new bed, I heard a deep growl coming from underneath me. Still have no idea why, but there was a possibility that my brain could have made that noise as I came out of a deep sleep. I laid there, staring at the ceiling in horror. I listened for another growl that fortunately never came before I felt ballsy enough to investigate my room. I lowered my head over the railing to scan the area below me. There was nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning I told my grandma about what happened. She handed me a rosary, instructed me to hang it underneath the bed to ward off whatever growled at me. I did, then went outside to play. Came back hours later to find the rosary on the floor. I knew I had secured it tightly. There was no way it could have fallen on its own. I picked it up and put it back, hoping that it would stay this time, but it didn't. It fell twice more. I tried to find better ways to keep it hanging, but I always found it on the carpet hours after I hung it up. Eventually, I come home from school to see it broken in half on the floor. the two pieces at least a foot from one another. This incident spooked me for a while, and we sold the bed when I was 12. UFO in Berlin, one of the biggest mysteries I've ever experienced or encountered. So this is one of the most extraordinary things I've encountered, and I'm asking if anybody had anything similar, or if there's any idea what it could be. I'm up for the discussion. So last year, 2022, September, on the 25th, if I remember correctly. The date and time is around 7:30 p.m. Staying over at a friend's. We're the only ones in the house. I'm going out to the balcony for a cigarette. I look up without a thought, and right above me I see this white light in a circle. Imagine the full moon, but 5 times bigger and brighter. It's Berlin, so classic weather is always cloudy. I couldn't tell properly, but anyway, I double-checked if it was the moon itself. Moved a bit to my right where I remember it from yesterday. I arrived in Berlin the day before. I saw the moon in front of me and looked up again, the light still above me. But how? I moved and it moved with me. At this point I went full-on panic mode, no joke. Started running through the balcony left to right. It's kind of funny I even started to try to trick it from going left and quickly turning right. It would move the way I would and stop on top of my head. I was a tiny bit scared to think something unknown was following me in the air, but more so I was intrigued. I could tell it wasn't our atmosphere and somewhat nearby. Thought I'm going nuts, and I don't think I'd ever tell this if my friend didn't encounter this with me. We're on the top floor of the building. You can see most of the house from the balcony, because it's instead of walls, it's glass. At this point, it was time to call my friend. He was in the living room walking around, and I noticed the same thing was following him as well. With excitement and a bit of confusion, I asked him, "Come and check, am I going crazy, or can you see this too?" Smiley face. While he's approaching the balcony, the white light is following him. Then imagine this scene. I'm looking at the light above me, and the moment he stepped on a balcony, he noticed the one above him. They're still in the clouds. And suddenly, in synchronicity, this white light started projecting blue beams on us. Our whole physical body from head to toe was shining an electric blue light. The only way I can describe it is if you imagine a huge projector coming from the clouds, but perfectly taking your human form. Slowly it started getting smaller, and I remember it took the form of a cube, and in a second, bam, it's gone. I even remember it made a sound I can only describe when the light goes out, but instead of hearing it from the outside, it felt like it was coming from my brain. I felt like it took something out of my head. It was sensational. I'll never forget it. I've never been so shook in my life. When it was over, we were still looking up at the sky for a few seconds and slowly turned our heads, and we literally couldn't speak for an hour or so. It's been a while now, so we've discussed it and made a conclusion that maybe we got scanned. I really need somebody to talk to. I've told this story a few times to get it off my chest, but I feel like I need a community that would take it seriously. Maybe find some answers. Sorry the post was so long. English is my second language and I'm pretty bad at writing. Thanks to those who made it through the story. You're welcome. And I'll appreciate any thoughts on this, or feel free to share any experiences similar to this one. I hear knocking on my 4th floor window at night. As the title says, I've been hearing knocks on my window at night. They aren't very rhythmic or frequent, but they sound very much like somebody's knocking on the window. I live on the 4th floor of an apartment complex. There's no trees near or high enough to do this. The weird thing is it only happens late at night, past 1 or 2 p.m. a.m., but only when I'm trying to sleep. I haven't heard them staying up late, yet there's also other noises. But it's hard to tell if it's the window or my pet rats that get a little crazy at night. The knocks are definitely the window, though. I'm an extremely paranoid person. While I would check it out any other time of day, as soon as everybody's asleep and it's just me, the knocking in the dark, I'm paralyzed. My fear response is freeze. So as soon as I hear it, I hide myself like a child as best I can, waiting in ice-cold sweat. That's what happened today. I couldn't sleep until I heard the knocks at around 1 a.m. Tried to ignore it and listen to some calming music, but my one earphone was broken. I could still hear it. Finally managed to sleep only to wake up at 3 a.m., wanting to sleep again. Calmed down now, only to become utterly terrified when it continued. I eventually slept through the night, but it was the most stress I ever want to experience at night. It was suggested to me to post my UFO encounter and the following strangeness. Apologies if this is the wrong place for this. I want to share a UFO encounter I had in Santa Barbara, California, October 2017, and hope somebody might have some feedback or insight. First, a bit of background. Before this encounter, I had zero interest in UFOs. Wasn't even interested enough to be a skeptic. Seems crazy to me now, but I just didn't think about them. My then boyfriend, now husband, was always into UFOs, and when we started dating, he even lent me a Jocks Valley book and a Richard Dolan book. I don't even think I opened them. I remember groaning in my head when he brought them over. They were huge. Whenever he started talking about UFOs or tried to show me something on YouTube, I would just zone out and politely nod. I was completely bored by the topic. Crazy. I'm now about as deep into the UFO phenomenon as one could be in 3 years. My encounter happened pretty close to 3 a.m. on the dot. I noticed an orange glowing light floating down the street. It was the color of a Himalayan salt lamp, if you've seen one of those. It was just under 2 blocks away when I first saw it. It was following the street exactly right down the middle. It was above the tree line, but not by much. I'm a bad judge of distance, but I would guess it was about 4 stories up. My building was 3 stories, and it was above my building, but not by much. I watched it float very slowly and purposefully down the street toward my direction. I was amazed and called my boyfriend and asked him if he could see it out of his bedroom window, which was on the 1st floor and faced out to the street I was smoking on. He confirmed that he saw it, and then weirdly just got off the phone. I remember thinking it was weird that he didn't come out and look at it with me. I was kind of a bit annoyed by it. Still can't believe he didn't come out. When it was almost above my head, it went dark. It just disappeared. Then an instant later, it flickered on. But this time it was a bit higher in the sky, and this time it was a perfectly clear flying saucer. Glowing orange, almost like an X-ray or bioluminescence. It was like I could see the outlines of the flying saucer. I could see porthole-type things, lots of detail, the exact shape, all crystal clear. But glowing. It was all glowing the same orange color. I could see the bottom lit up, but strangely, I could also see the top, which was also lit up. Maybe it was at an angle, or because I'm looking at it from an angle, I'm not sure. But it was so clearly a flying saucer, I couldn't believe it. It wasn't until that moment that my brain clicked and thought, oh my God, aliens are real and I'm seeing a UFO right now and it's really close to me and this is really happening. I wasn't scared at all. It was almost as though the occupant of the craft were communicating with me and saying, yeah, hi there. We see you looking at us and we're looking at you too, don't worry. I couldn't see any occupants, but I had this strong sense that there were 2 and they were looking down at me from the craft. After a few seconds, it flickered off for a moment and then came back on for a few more seconds. I stared at it for several seconds and got a very good look. I remember looking at the detail and different parts and having many thoughts. I can still picture it clear as that night. I wasn't close enough to see any markings, but it was undeniably a flying saucer, and I had a clear look at it for a while. Despite having my phone in my hand, I didn't think to take a picture or call my boyfriend. I was just transfixed staring at it. and I was totally at peace. It felt friendly. Eventually it flickered off, and then back to just being a glowing orange light with no distinct shape. That's how it had been when I first saw it, just this intense glowing orange light with no distinct edges or shape. I watched it take a right-angle turn away from me and head in a straight line toward the mountains. I watched it travel for a few blocks, and then it disappeared out of my sight. Didn't take off anywhere, just faded out. At that moment, a glowing white orb dropped down out of nowhere. I noticed it when it was about over my roof level. I was standing outside of a one-story house across the street from my building, and when I first saw it, it was at the same level as the roof of the house. It seemingly came out of nowhere, but caught my eye at roof level and then dropped down as quickly as anything could a few feet lower. It stopped. I looked right at it, and at this point it was maybe 10 feet away and 3 feet above me. It was larger than a grapefruit, smaller than a soccer ball, brilliant glowing white light as bright as it could be in a perfect sphere with distinct edges. I was certain that it was intelligent and interested in me. Then it jumped down further toward me and stopped again about 4 feet away from me. It jumped down so fast that it almost looked like two orbs for a moment. It was in one spot and then in another in an instant. Unlike when I saw the craft, I was terrified. I had a terrible feeling of complete terror. And after that second jumped toward me, I ran full speed across the street and into my street-level front door. I was terrified. I ran inside, didn't turn around, locked the door, and ran to the bedroom. I immediately told my boyfriend what had happened and told him I wanted to Google what I'd seen. In his wisdom, he made me type out what I'd seen so I wouldn't forget or doubt myself before looking online. I typed out pretty much what I've written above and then just kind of stayed up all night Googling things, looking for images of what I'd seen, reading other encounters with white orbs. I was pretty freaked out. I didn't even want to look out the window. My boyfriend went outside after I told him the story, despite me really not wanting to be alone. He didn't see anything, though. The next day I went to work. I remember my boyfriend warning me to be careful and to look out for any strange people. I didn't think too much of that, feeling like my encounter was very unhuman. There was no reason to be on guard with humans when I went to work. I felt much less scared once it was light outside. Now this part is really, really strange, and I can only explain it as I perceived it to happen. I was smoking a cigarette walking back toward work. It was after my lunch break when somebody asked me for a light. I was smoking, so I couldn't really say no, so even though I got the sense he was sketchy, I stopped to offer my lighter. I worked at a warehouse. There were a lot of drug users and homeless people in the neighborhood. Anyway, I avoided looking at his face because I didn't want to get in a conversation or invite him to start talking to me. I just got out my lighter and held it up in front of him. At this point, he pulls out rolling paper and rolling tobacco, and I'm thinking, it's going to take forever. He hasn't even started rolling the cigarette. I keep my head lowered away from his face, but I'm watching him try to roll a cigarette, and it was like he didn't know how. It was really weird. He was terrible at it. It took forever and looked barely smokable by the end. I remember thinking it was so out of human norms to make a person wait this long to borrow their lighter. I considered just handing him the lighter and letting him keep it so I could leave. But I really liked that lighter, and that was really the only reason I stuck around. But here's the crazy part. Water was pouring out of his sleeves and from under his shirt. Didn't make any sense. He was just dripping and pouring, really, tons of water everywhere. He was also holding all these weird, clear plastic envelopes and folders filled with maps and candy wrappers. He had put them down on the sidewalk next to him to roll a cigarette. I was looking at them in the water, and it was pouring out of them too. I clearly remember watching the water pour into the sidewalk. There were weird maps of parks, not street maps, and trash like receipts and candy wrappers in the envelopes. It was just so weird. My brain somehow just accepted it. Eventually, I lit his mess of a cigarette and left. I immediately crossed the street to get away from him, past an old red pickup truck filled with weird folders and junk in the bed of a truck and water pouring out of the cracks of the door. Super weird. Doesn't make any sense, I'd say. As soon as I passed the truck, I never thought anything of it again. Like it just disappeared from my brain. Can't explain it. Text my boyfriend dumb stuff all day long, but didn't text him about this. Didn't tell anyone at work or ask anyone else if they'd seen this man. I just completely disappeared from my mind. Till I was pressed by my boyfriend, which I'll explain below. Before that, a few notable things about the strange man. He seemed to be in his mid-30s, like me and my boyfriend. He was wearing thick wool flannel, very similar to one that my boyfriend has, that he uses exclusively to smoke across the street from our apartment, where I'd seen the craft and the orb the night before. I didn't get a good look at his face. My boyfriend also drives a red pickup truck. My boyfriend drives an older model Toyota Tacoma, and the truck I saw connected to the man was very old, maybe from the 50s. But it was also red. I didn't put those things together, but my boyfriend did. It's interesting. What I saw doesn't make sense. It wasn't even like his clothes were wet or he was wet. It was just as if water was pouring out from underneath his clothes and inside of his strange folders and envelopes and books. He had so much weird stuff with him. It just doesn't make sense. But that was my memory of my encounter with him. After work, I went home. My boyfriend asked me if anything weird had happened to me and if I'd met anyone weird. I think he was getting like a Men in Black type thing. I kept saying, no, nothing happened. Just a normal day. He literally had to ask me a bunch of times. Finally, when he said so, "You didn't see anybody weird today, are you sure?" The whole water pouring guy came back to me. Told him the story and I couldn't believe that I'd forgotten it. I also couldn't believe how crazy and unbelievable the whole thing was and how I managed to completely forget it. So that's pretty much my experience. I'm quite certain that the craft and the orb were connected. My boyfriend thinks the weird encounter the next day was also related. I guess he's probably right. I don't know, even to this day I never think about that part. I only think about the craft and the orb. And in fact, I almost didn't even write about the strange man here, which seems crazy, I don't know. It's a really weird memory. Very clear, but almost like my brain doesn't want to remember it. Maybe because it makes no sense. Wish I'd written about the strange man then, like I had about the craft and the orb. I did confirm with my boyfriend. What I've written here is what I told him that day. 3 years into my study of the phenomenon, I often wish I had reacted differently to the orb. That man fascinates me. Ask Reddit. I have some minor stories, at least compared to other stories here. 2 paranormal and 1 freaky. 1. My aunt watched me during the summers when I was in elementary school and my parents worked. She had to go pick her kids up from summer school at one point. I stayed at the house alone and watched TV. I started hearing tap, tap, tap. I looked in the kitchen where I heard it, and in the kitchen cabinets they were opening and closing. Then a music box started going off. Sat on the porch until my aunt and cousins got back. Didn't really freak me out and didn't really tell anybody about it. 2. My friend and I were playing in our backyard late in the evening. The sun was almost down, there was a house directly behind ours, and our backyards are open to each other. To the south of our yards was a very large hill with a row of pine trees at the bottom. An old lady came out on the balcony of the house behind ours. She definitely didn't live there. She told us to go inside because the hunters are out, and they might shoot us. Weird. It got weirder when we looked at the trees at the bottom of the hill and saw a group of shadows coming out with guns. I ran inside, told my parents, and they blamed it on the TV. 3. This is the weird one. Me and 3 friends drove 2 cars to a party about an hour away from where we lived. We drove back in 2 cars, 2 people each. It was in rural Kansas. We took 2 lanes, they're paved county roads. They're everywhere. We passed through a small town, a couple thousand people maybe. I got back up to a highway speed, and in the middle of the road was a giant white owl. It was taller than my car, like 5 or 6 feet tall. Swerved around it, looked in my mirror, and saw my friend behind me swerve around it too. Got home around midnight, and we all saw it, but none of us believed it. Told my mom the next morning she swears the exact same thing happened to her right outside the same small town a few years prior. I'm more flabbergasted by this than the ghost stories. Ask Reddit. At my mam's house, I was 15. She and my dad were at church on a Wednesday, December night doing kids club. I was alone in my room playing Xbox, like any other night, with my old dog chilling in the downstairs hallway waiting for my dad to get back. In my room, I had a fake wall that was out there, so there was like metal ladders to the loft. All of a sudden, I hear the metal ladders creaking, like somebody was walking up or down them. Then suddenly my door and the door to the balcony just burst open. They were both fully closed and no windows were open in the house as it was December. Then the stairs start creaking. Then the downstairs living room just properly slams shut. So my poor dog bolts up the stairs, comes and lays in my room facing the doorway and growling sporadically. Wouldn't leave my side until my parents got home maybe an hour and a half later. The weird thing is that she'd never ever come into my room before. She'd always be looking at the metal runners in the carpet that divide the rooms up and never come in before that night and never did after either. After she passed, we got our new dog. He'd continually pick his ears up and growl constantly at nothing. Also, a week after my grandma passed, there was a message on her answering machine which dead-ass was my grandma's voice from the hospital saying my mam's name clear as day. I listened to the message, went in to say to my parents, "Have you heard that voicemail?" They were like, "Yeah, we were waiting for you to listen to it before we said anything. So we didn't influence what you heard." They're Christians and don't believe in that, but even that had them totally thrown. I still have the message in my voice notes on my iPhone. My grandmother sees people in the night, and I'm looking for expiations. So I'm looking for hypotheses and your opinions on the subject and what it could be. She just told me this story, and she's looking for an explanation herself. So my grandmother's almost 80 years old. When she was little at night while she slept, she woke up suddenly. She saw people around her. They were there without moving. When she spoke to them, they didn't answer. They were just standing there. I don't know the exact number of times she saw them, but there were some occasions. After she got married, she now lives with her husband and my youngest uncle in the same house since the 60s. But a little bit before that, when my uncles and aunts were young, several times she woke up and saw a woman at the head of her daughter. She had asked people at the time to understand the reason because she was afraid for her daughter. They told her that the woman she saw at night is there to protect her daughter, and now, a month ago or even less, she saw a rather young man, according to her, always standing in the dark without speaking, just staring at her. Sometimes he would be above her head, sometimes at the end of the sofa or at his feet. She could see his face, but she can't be more specific. She asked him what he wanted and why he was there, but he was just motionless. After my uncle heard her, "Gecko." After my uncle heard her, and they came to the room, the young man suddenly disappeared. She told me she wasn't afraid of him, but she didn't understand what he wanted. I think my apartment is haunted 2 to 3 years into living in it. I always teased my SO that a crackhead lived in the attic. We don't live in the best neighborhood, so it was just a running joke that the previous tenant never moved out. I was also genuinely nervous that our attic had no partition. No partition. I believe they mean partition to the apartment next door. So one day he peeked inside. We went from occasionally hearing odd noises in the attic that we couldn't really explain to hearing them in our apartment. Shortly after he went into the attic, I started an anxiety pill that made me hallucinate. Whew. I chalked all the odd things, after the attic to the pills and continued to move forward without the pills. But the noises never stopped, and my husband has heard them too. I, however, have seen things while on the pills, have heard things ever since. Once I was upstairs and putting away laundry. My sister was in town, and I just thought, keep an ear on the door. She'll be home soon. We'll need to let her in. Just then, the door knocked right on cue, but no one was there. Our apartment situated in a position that the knocker would have to run away without me seeing them. I'm talking Forrest Gump meets Usain Bolt run away. That's fast. Yes, Gecko, that is fast. It wasn't a small knock either. Recently, I came home from a bad day of work. I'm in the bathroom downstairs sobbing, trying not to wake anybody asleep upstairs. I hear my daughter call out, "Mommy!" And from where she stood on the stairs, I assumed that I woke her up. Called her name a few times, she never answered. So I gathered myself and went upstairs to check on her. I assumed that she hadn't seen me in the bathroom and had just gone back up, but when I opened her door, she was open-mouthed snoring. I had already been curious about her calling out to me. She doesn't call me Mommy, and the voice was too high upon reflection. That was about a week ago, but it got me thinking about another off incident months before. I'd been asleep and was awoken by my child wanting to get in bed. This isn't super unusual, so I opened the blankets and motioned, I believe they think. So I opened the blankets and motioned for her to get in. When I woke up that morning, she wasn't at my bed. She had gone back to hers. Now this was super unusual. It takes an act of God to get this child to lay down. I dismissed it because I'd been drinking the night before. I just assumed that I fell back asleep and she or my husband moved her. After hearing something call for me, I'm now scared the crackhead baby ghost slept with me. I know that sounds crazy, but I jest to myself, not so terrified, and for some less crazy news. My husband and I have one shared, definite audible experience that we can't explain, and the attic was partitioned off and empty. Can anybody give me any insight or tips on why this would start up after years of living here, and why it centers around me, or how to make it stop? I know how to make this stop. See ya.